Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those who are joining from WA, South Australia, and the NT. Welcome to the first of our two Rail Safety Week 2025 Masterclass webinars. My name is Sudha, and I'm the GM of Products and Innovation at RISSB, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Before we proceed any further, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we meet today. And for me in Perth, that's the Whadjuk Noongar people. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us today. For Rail Safety Week 2025, we have dedicated two masterclass webinars to the event because we recognize the evolving challenges in rail safety and the need to address both emerging issues and ongoing risks. Today's webinar, we will feature ONRSR's sector-specific safety themes, which focuses on optimizing effectiveness of the National Regulators Work Programme. This session will help us understand emerging safety issues and provide guidance on how to stay vigilant in relation to both new challenges and traditional risks. Tomorrow's second webinar will be delivered by Office of Transport Safety Investigation, OTSI, and explore key findings from the Werris Creek investigation. These webinars don't just promote awareness, the learnings within will contribute to the development of safer and more resilient rail operations. Our commitment to safety is foundational to everything that we do, whether we are developing standards or sharing best practices or fostering collaboration within the rail industry. We are driven by the goal of enhancing the safety, efficiency, and resilience of our rail networks. RISSB plays an integral role in ensuring that the rail sector remains reliable, efficient, and most importantly, safe. Our 200-odd products that we have, standards, codes, and guidelines and rules are designed to provide clear, actionable tools that will help the industry meet its rail safety obligation while improving operational performance. Supporting Rail Safety Week aligns with our mission to harmonize safety practices, facilitate knowledge sharing, and build a safer future for our rail stakeholders. Through these initiatives, we ensure our members and our wider rail industry have the resources needed to identify and mitigate risks and improve safety outcomes across the network. By hosting these webinars, we aim to ensure that RISSB members are, as well as the broader rail industry, have access to the latest safety intelligence and regulatory updates, all while maintaining a commitment to industry collaboration and continuous improvement. We are delighted to partner with industry leaders like ONRSR and the New South Wales Office of Transport Safety Investigation, OTSI, to deliver vital safety insight during Rail Safety Week. Let me introduce ONRSR's presenters for today. Dane Newton, General Manager at Sydney. Dane has close to 20 years experience managing risk, assurance, and compliance in various safety-critical industries. Dane worked as a system safety consultant to the UK Ministry of Defence before moving to Sydney to manage safety assurance on projects for Railcorp, Transport for New South Wales, and Sydney Trains. Dane joined ONRSR almost 10 years ago, where he successfully developed ONRSR's first framework for risk-based regulation and established its initial data analytics function. He now leads a team of rail safety officers responsible for safety oversight of over 60 accredited operators. An engineer by background, Dane holds a master's degree in aerospace engineering and postgraduate qualification in system safety engineering and management. Let me introduce the next presenter, Ewald Eisel, General Manager, Adelaide, ONRSR. Ewald began his career as a rail industry in the rail industry in 1997, following 15 years in the hospitality sector. He spent 13 years with an interstate passenger rail operator, where one of the most significant achievements was the successful launch of the GAN service between Adelaide and Darwin in February 2004, establishing the foundational operational procedures for the iconic journey. In 2011, Ewald transitioned into rail regulation, taking on the role of rail safety officer. His leadership and expertise in the field led to the appointment in 2016 as the General Manager for South Australia, Northern Territory and Tasmania at ONRSR, where he continues to play a key role in advancing rail safety and regulatory oversight. Before we proceed any further, let me quickly note that the Teams Q&A are available, so anytime during the session, please put your questions that you want to ask Dane or Ewald at the end of the presentation. I'll come back and we'll answer those questions. Without holding up any more time, over to you, Dane and Evil, to take us through the presentation. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for the introduction, Sudha, and thank you for the opportunity to be part of the RISSB webinar series during Rail Safety Week. We really appreciate it. So today, Ewald and I are going to talk about ONSR's Rails sector safety themes, which represent some of the areas that ONSR will focus on during the 25-26 financial year. I'll start by providing some background information on the concepts of sector safety themes, the strategic context at ONSR that they sit within, and how we identified them. And we'll then dive into the sector safety themes in more detail, running through each of the 7 rail sectors and corresponding priority themes, discussing why they're a focus for ONSR and how we intend to tackle them. We should then have plenty of time at the end to get stuck into some questions from the audience. But first, some strategic context. In July last year, ONSR launched its strategic directions for 2024 to 2027, which set out 5 strategic priorities developed through an extensive staff and stakeholder consultation process. These priorities, which you can see on the slide, are to influence safety practices and build safety knowledge among rail transport operators, ensure our people are valued, skilled and engaged, cultivate strong and collaborative relationships with stakeholders, position ONSR as a future-focused regulator, and leverage data and intelligence to enhance our approach to risk-based regulation. Now, you can read much more about these strategic priorities and the supporting key initiatives in ONSR's 25-26 corporate plan, which was recently published on our website. And in that plan, you'll see that the identification of sector safety themes is one of the key initiatives under the first strategic priority to influence safety practices and build safety knowledge across industry. And our goal here, as always, is to improve safety. And we hope that by publicising our focus areas for each sector of the rail industry, it will raise the profile of associated risks and influence positive change by safety leaders. But the identification of sector safety themes is not just about raising the profile of associated risks. The themes will also inform ONSR's work programme for the next year at least, shaping both our compliance programme of audits and inspections, as well as the work we do in the safety promotion space, where we hope to share with industry the insights and lessons that we learn through our activities via various engagement channels. So how do we go about identifying and developing our sector safety themes? Well, this slide highlights the data sources used to inform our decisions. It includes occurrence data, in-field observations from our programme of audits, inspections and site visits, findings from investigations, and other sources of regulatory intelligence, such as confidential reports and complaints that we receive on a day-to-day basis. Using this information, members of ONSR's National Operations Committee prioritise potential sector safety themes by risk, with a bias towards low probability but high consequence events, to settle on one priority theme for each of the 7 sectors of the rail industry. That's one for the passenger sector, the freight sector, the rail infrastructure manager sector, the light rail sector, tourist and heritage sector, yards, terminals and siding operators, and finally one for the maintainers and constructors. Where applicable, qualitative risk models were then developed for each theme by ONSR's safety strategy team using fault tree analysis and event tree analysis. This helps us to understand and unpack the potential sequence of hazardous events that can unfold for each theme, including causal factors and consequence factors, and the corresponding preventative and mitigative controls we would expect operators to have in place. And this last step was really important, as it has informed the development of comprehensive audit scopes that our rail safety officers will use in the field to verify that operators have adequate systems and procedures in place to manage the risks associated with each theme. So this approach affords ONSR the opportunity to subject all operators in a given sector to the same nationally consistent audit focused on the priority theme for that sector. So in the passenger sector, for example, the likes of Sydney Trains, Metro Trains Melbourne, Queensland Rail, etc., will all receive the same audit, allowing ONSR to benchmark performance and capture lessons and learnings which can be conveyed to industry. Now, I appreciate a lot of what I've said so far probably seems a bit abstract, but I'm hoping that as we get into the sectors and you get to see the themes, it becomes a bit more real. But just before we get into them, there are a few things I'd like you to bear in mind. Firstly, an operator can be a member of multiple sectors. So many of our passenger operators, for example, are both rolling stock operators and rail infrastructure managers. They may also operate yards and terminals. So this means that multiple themes may apply to a single operator. Secondly, just because an operator is a member of a sector doesn't mean that they will automatically be targeted with regulatory activities for the corresponding safety theme. If ONRSR has already, for example, focused on one of the sector safety themes with a particular operator in recent times, and we've been satisfied that appropriate systems and procedures in place to manage the risk, then it's unlikely we'd repeat that activity with that operator. And thirdly, as we step through the themes, you might wonder why some key risk areas, such as level crossing safety, track worker safety, and SPAD management, have not been called out. This is because these areas cut across multiple sectors and they're really industry-wide safety themes. So rest assured that these industry-wide themes remain very much on ONRSR's agenda at both the national and local level. They're just not the focus of today's webinar. So let's get into the themes, and we'll start with the passenger sector, where our priority theme is fire on train. So this sector includes operators such as Sydney Trains, Metro Trains Melbourne, Queensland Rail, New South Wales Trainlink, V-Line, Metro Trains Sydney, the Rail Commissioner in South Australia, and the Public Transport Authority of Western Australia. And collectively, these operators carry millions of passengers every day, passengers who expect and demand the highest levels of safety. Now, the risk of a fire on train has already received attention from ONRSR following an incident in Melbourne in March this year, during which an e-bike caught fire, resulting in the evacuation of all passengers and pretty extensive damage to the carriage. And thermal runaways of lithium-ion batteries, particularly the larger ones found in e-ridables, can result in fire or explosion and significant emissions of toxic smoke. And with passenger trains carrying hundreds of passengers in confined spaces, if evacuation in the event of a fire is delayed or poorly managed, it can lead to catastrophic outcomes. And ONRSR's inquiries into that Melbourne incident highlighted the importance of emergency response and preparedness in the event of a fire on train. And we're really keen to test this with operators across the passenger sector via a comprehensive compliance programme. So if you're an operator in this sector, or you work for an operator in this sector, you can expect regulatory activities covering rolling stock capabilities, train crew response, and network control response, all in relation to fire on train. So the activities will focus on processes such as risk management, emergency management plans, training and instruction, and general engineering and operational system safety. Because these items will be critical in helping ONRSR to understand ONRSR's operators' approach to managing and responding to a fire on train, and to ensuring that those appropriate systems and procedures are in place. Our next sector is light rail, where our priority theme is contractual oversight. So this sector includes the operators of the light rail systems in Melbourne, Sydney, Adelaide, Canberra, Parramatta, the Gold Coast, and Newcastle. And the theme for this sector is unique amongst the other sectors in that contractual oversight isn't a hazardous event. It isn't something that can go wrong during railway operations and directly cause harm. Instead, contractual oversight is part of the broader system of managing safety. And it's particularly relevant to the light rail sector because of the contractual models and organisational structures in place across Australia, where we often have complex relationships and partnerships between government transport departments, OPCOs, project offices, and operations and maintenance contractors. So when we refer to contractual oversight in this context, we don't mean the more traditional contractor management that ONRSR's previously focused on, such as when an operator engages labour hire workers or an organisation to conduct maintenance for them. We instead mean the contractual oversight that transport departments have over accredited light rail operators, or that small accredited OPCOs have over their O&M contractors. And the reason this is a focus area for ONRSR is because it's not always clear in these relationships which party has effective control and management of the railway operations and the associated safety risks. In some models, the accredited operator runs the day-to-day operations of the light rail system with oversight by the Transport Department, whereas in others, the accredited operator contracts out the day-to-day operation and maintenance of the light rail system, exercising management and control via contractual levers. So regardless of which model is used, it's important that contractual oversight prioritizes safe outcomes and doesn't excessively interfere or encroach on the accredited operator's accountability for managing the safety of its operations. Now, work's still underway at ONRSR to develop the program of activities to tackle this theme. But if you're an operator in this sector, you can expect a strong focus from ONRSR on governance and internal control arrangements, management responsibilities, accountabilities and authorities, safety audit arrangements, and procurement and contract management. Next up is the freight sector, where our priority theme is runaways or uncontrolled movements. Now, this is quite a large sector for ONRSR, with around 20 accredited rolling stock operators of freight trains nationally, carrying bulk and intermodal freight across the country, including dangerous goods. It includes operators such as Pacific National, Horizon, Cube, Watco, and Tasrail, as well as the big four mining operators in the Pilbara. So risk modelling by our safety strategy team for this theme considered different categories of runaway, including runaway of a stabled freight train in a yard or siding, as well as runaway during mainline operations. And mainline runaways were then broken down further into loss of control runaways, such as those we've seen in the Illawarra Range in New South Wales in recent years, and wagon runaways following a train parting, as occurred in Sydney recently. So freight train runaways have received a lot of attention from ONRSR in recent years through incident investigations and inquiries and initiatives such as the Illawarra Range Forum, where we brought the rail infrastructure manager and several freight operators together to discuss shared responsibilities for managing the risk of runaways on the range and to seek safety improvement. But much of this regulatory effort has been responsive or reactive, either in response to an incident or a perceived trend of incidents. Whereas now, with our sector safety themes, we have an opportunity to take a much more proactive, focused approach with a series of regulatory activities that will focus on how freight operators are managing the risk of each type of runaway. So operators in this sector can expect an initial audit that will seek to verify that they have identified, assessed, and evaluated the risk of runaway, and that they have adequate systems, procedures, and controls in place to manage that risk so far as is reasonably practicable. We'll seek evidence that the different types of runaways and their causal factors have been considered, and that a range of safety controls are in place, such as effective braking systems, together with a strong inspection and maintenance regime, regular training and competency assessment of drivers, particularly on challenging routes with steep grades, and clear procedures for securing rolling stock or for in the event of an emergency. Depending on the results of the ONRSR audit, it will likely be followed up by a series of inspections at high-risk sites to check that the operator's controls and procedures are being applied in practice and are working effectively. So this may include, for example, cab rides by ONRSR officers or inspections of stable trains at higher-risk yards, terminals and sidings. We will also want to see how operators are assuring themselves that this risk is being effectively managed. So expect us to ask about your internal audit and control assurance checks for this risk. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Ewald, who will run through our safety teams for the 4 remaining sectors, kicking off with more discussion on the risk of runaways in the yards, terminal and siding sector.
Thanks, Dane. So for yards and sidings, shuntings and runaways. So as for freight, this is more likely to occur through shunting practices. Runaway trains can lead to collisions with other trains, derailments, and can be dangerous for workers that are working within the yard. We've seen recently a bit of an uptick in this area, which has sort of brought it to front of mind, and some of our investigations have seen a need for us to look at this more closely. So the methodology behind looking at how freight yards and private sidings and sidings are being managed is we'll start with risk assessments. So has the risk of runaway in a yard, terminal or siding been identified, assessed, evaluated, and that the risk is being managed so far? So, has the risk considered site-specific infrastructure, details like gradients, curves, protections from the main line, control of the yard and its infrastructure? What are the environmental conditions? How are the trains loaded, being moved around? What are the procedures which adequately address the requirements of specific locations? And how is the management of defective rolling stock and operations with degrading braking systems being managed effectively? There's also the aspect of training and competence of shunters and train crew, include training for specific locations as well. So, to make sure that they've got the knowledge of those yards particularly, and particularly the maintenance of the rolling stock, including the critical brake componentries. And the good old human factors and fatigue, making sure that that's taken into account when you're working in these yards that are often 24/7 operations. So we'll also be, as part of the audit, be looking at what operational system safety requirements are in place and how they are being managed to avoid, rolling stock runaways. So the procedures for identification of interface risks to the safety of rail operations between the RIM and the RSOs, and what are the different rail safety worker responsibilities for shunting and stabling, the operation of the points, application of handbrakes and chocks, etc. The location-specific details that impact the securing and stabling of the rolling stock, once again regarding the grade, the siding length, the site usage and security around there. What are network controls responsibilities in this area, and what are the local network rules and procedures? And once that's all taken into, how are people from a control assurance, how are operators making sure that things are being managed effectively through safety audit arrangements, how are you managing any notifiable occurrences, and what corrective actions are in play, and how they're moving on from that area. So quite a diverse sort of topic, but very critical, where you've got workers on the ground and rolling stock moving within the confined spaces of yards and sidings and freight terminals. Next slide. Thanks, Dane. The next one is really quite a big topic in significant track infrastructure failure, specifically focused at the major RIMs within Australia. And as we know, there's potentially catastrophic consequences with this, and the key is to evaluating the key mitigations in place. So as ONRSR does conduct regulatory activity, including audits, inspections and site visits across multiple operators and sectors in this area. In conducting these regulatory activities, ONRSR often observes and identifies both good and poor safety practices. And in the past, we've highlighted some of the good practices for maintaining rail track, which is obviously a key piece of rail infrastructure that rail transport operators are required to manage and maintain safely. Track infrastructure failures can result in major service disruptions, delays, cancellations, and evaluating and mitigating these risks help maintain consistent, reliable rail services, which is essential from both freight and passenger operations. In relation to effective management and rail track infrastructure, a good safety management system should contain asset details, indicative risks and controls, track infrastructure standards, systems and procedures for inspections, inspection records, and defect management. Going back to asset details, such as an asset register to provide information about the track infrastructure itself, indicative risks and controls, documenting the risks and controls for track infrastructure, demonstrating that key risks are being monitored and managed effectively. Track infrastructure standards, the standards that define the criteria of how track infrastructure should be maintained, including the standards applied. Track infrastructure inspection standards and procedures, RIM track infrastructure maintenance procedures, RIM track infrastructure defects management process, and priority ranking for those defects with corrective action timeframes. There's also the systems and procedures aspect, which the procedures to underpin the overall process for maintaining the track infrastructure, and information that procedures can cover include the competency requirements for the track infrastructure inspectors and track engineers. Inspection records are key to keeping things under control, undertaking inspections of track infrastructure that helps understand its condition and what repairs or maintenance may be required. And defect management, coming back to that again, is about ensuring that defects are accurately recorded, critically assessed, prioritised, tracked, monitored and actioned, ensuring traceability from defect discovery to rectification. So our regulatory scope would include reviewing and testing technical maintenance plans, any management of change process, monitoring processes and procedures, those defect management systems, competency and training procedures, and corrective action systems and procedures. So in this area, we're probably looking at an audit to get a feel for how the organising is managing this risk, and then it'll be followed up with a number of inspections after that audit on site and looking at the various provisioning centres around the country that do the work. Thanks, Dane. Next slide. Getting into the tourist and heritage area now. And for tourist and heritage, we're looking at significant rolling stock failure. And the variety of rolling stock in service that tourist and heritage operators operate, can vary: steam, diesel locomotives, different varieties of passenger wagons, and that can lead to inconsistencies in applying the appropriate engineering standards. So, one piece of rolling stock isn't the same as the next piece of rolling stock necessarily. And once again, it's that low probability, high consequence, which could be catastrophic failures such as brake failure, axle failure, or fire, which can lead to derailments and collisions. And identifying and mitigating potential failures ensures the safety of everyone on board, because as we know, tourist and heritage operators largely rely on passengers on their train for funding. We'll be taking a two-stage approach in this area, like a compliance approach where we'll do audits that which will select certain operators that we think will need to do an audit, was looking at significant rolling stock failure and how they're managing the risk of that, and understanding what the risk, the general engineering and operational system safety areas are, training and procurement and contractor management. The audit process for this theme has been designed to determine both the adequacy of controls procedures in place to manage the risk and the application of those controls and procedures. The objective of the audit is therefore to validate that the tourist and heritage operators have identified, assessed and evaluated the risks and have adequate controls and procedures in place to manage it so far. Along with the compliance approach, we'll also be looking at an education approach here as well. And the education will focus on requirements of regular inspection, maintenance and repair of critical rolling stock aspects. We'll also highlight the need to use competent people to undertake these activities, which is really important for these tourist and heritage operators. And what are those types of the competencies that are held, and what relevant industry standards should be applied in operational procedures for managing the specific issue of significant failure while in service. And this education will be looking to highlight with tourist and heritage operators that if their SMS adequately managing the risk associated with significant rolling stock failure, that's a really key part of that. And we've got some educational materials that we've had in the past and that will roll out again to make sure that rolling stock operators are in the tourist and heritage sector are across that. And the last topic, thanks, Dane, the last sector is maintainers and constructors and RRV collision, which is a really major and complex topic. And it's appropriate that it is, because RRVs often operate in complex and constrained rail environments. So it's a high consequence risk when you have a collision with an RRV, particularly RRV and train. And as I said, they operate in complex, constrained rail environments where visibility, communication, or procedures may be inconsistent. Reviewing the risks help prevent unsafe movements, miscommunication, or incorrect placement of vehicles on live tracks. So our compliance approach here is to look at the audits to see what the RRV operators have got in play. We'll be looking at how they're managing the risks, how they transfer those risks to different sites, and the different type of protections that are in place when they're out in the field. As I said, we'll be looking at large possessions and how they're being moved around in there. And with the compliance approach, we'll also be continuing on that education piece, where we've put animations in play before and put out documents related to RRVs. We'll be looking at how RRVs are provided by non-accredited parties, or where they are operated by non-accredited parties, what the roles and responsibilities are when dealing with RRVs. And we'll be looking at how they're eliminating risks through coupling of RRV vehicles during non-work mode travel or road transport between work sites, engineering controls to prevent a RRV to RRV collisions, such as anti-collision detection devices, including how braking systems are interlocked with anti-collision technology, and the administrative controls such as minimum separation distances, worksite demarcation, second driver person during non-work mode travel, and fatigue requirements. So this, again, this sort of activities will start with an audit of operators that we've identified, how the risk is being managed and what controls are in place, and then getting out into the field and getting out on work sites and seeing that those controls are in play. Thanks, Dane. So that is the sector safety themes that we do have for the different sectors that are going on. This slide's just up to just remind people that the amount of information that we do have on the ONRSR website. We've had those animations, safety messages, safety alerts, and documentation that you can look through on the website. There's also the follow us through the Office of National Safety Regulator on LinkedIn. The ONRSR Way is an excellent document that will explain to you the difference between our audits, inspections and site visits particularly, which is the topic of today's discussion on how we'll be monitoring that, and give you a good indication of the difference between those sorts of activities, with further information available in our annual reports and rail safety reports. And Engage is a great monthly newsletter to subscribe through the website. I think, Dane, that's where we're at.
Thanks, Ewald. All right, Sudha, I think we'll open up for some questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. Thanks, Dane, and thanks, Ewald. It's fantastic to have a clear idea of where the direction of ONRSR is going. So yes, I've got a couple of questions that are coming through, but while the questions are coming through and giving some people time to write those questions, I've got a few that I thought I may ask. Hopefully it won't be too difficult. Look, one of the things that you highlighted here, one of the things that I thought would be a focus, and probably not a big focus, is this whole area of new technologies and AI and automation coming into play. Where does that risk sit in ONRSR's view on the introduction of those technologies and the risk that may pose, and what's your insight into that area?
Do you want to take that one, Dane?
Yeah, I'll have a crack at it, Ewald. So it's a good question, Sudha. I think there's perhaps been a myth in the past that ONRSR can be a blocker to some of this new technology, which is far from the truth. We are strong advocates and supporters of new technology, particularly when it leads to improvement in safety, and often it is new technology that gives us those significant step change improvements. In relation to the sectors, new technology doesn't neatly align to one specific sector because it applies across the board, particularly to the sort of the big end of town sectors, the passengers, freight and RIM sectors. Where does it fit into our work program? Really, it comes down to safety assurance and safety change management. So whenever there is new technology that's to be introduced into an operation, we expect those operators to apply their system safety change management procedures and go through all the engineering assurance and safety case work and SFARP determinations that we would expect. And providing that operators can demonstrate that technology can be introduced safely, then ONRSR will be a strong advocate of that.
And is there sort of any concern at this particular point in time? ONRSR is comfortable with the current process that we have within major projects and change management, that these will be picked up, and there's no major concern at this particular point in time? No significant concerns in the approach that operators are applying for major projects. We've got a pretty significant accreditation team within ONRSR that focuses on the sort of the higher tier major projects, and we get a lot of assurance from those guys that this stuff is being managed pretty well across industry. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Look, obviously this is an interesting topic. always interested, from my perspective, I'm interested in that because there are decision tools that are coming in, AI coming into play. How does management of effective management control, who owns it, all of those kind of questions that kind of come into the discussion. So it's something of interest. So I thought I'll ask the question. One of the other questions that come in here, and we noted the fact that you talked about the focus on contractual oversight for light rail. Obviously that's a theme for that sector, which is fantastic, and I think the focus in there. Do you see that the other sectors like passenger and heavy rail, that this is not a risk, or it didn't come up as a major risk as far as contractual arrangements are concerned? Where do you guys see that at this particular point in time?
Oh, I think it is a risk in all sectors. It's perhaps just a little coming to sharper focus for ONRSR within the light rail sector. Certainly, there are complex sort of supply chains, contractual arrangements, and models in place across all sectors. But yeah, for ONRSR, there are higher priorities in those other sectors. Whereas for light rail, we do have some novel sort of accreditation strategies and models in place that we'd like to get sort of stuck into to really understand where effective control and management of the railway operation sits. Is there being interference from non-accredited parties? Do the accredited parties have the competence and capacity, or ongoing competence and capacity, to continue to manage those safety risks? These are the sorts of things that we want to explore as part of the work program for that sector safety theme.
Look, another question here, Dane, that they've asked, which is very kind of a great segue around how novel accreditation models for light rail differs from traditional accreditation approaches. It could be a huge conversation, I know, but can you just kind of put a couple of pointers out to answer the question of, what are some of the thinking, early thought process in this area?
Yeah, so I'll probably touch on a couple of our light rail operators whereby the accredited entity is not a traditional rail operator. They don't have they don't employ tram drivers. They don't manage the network control. They're not managing the day-to-day operation. Those accredited operators are contracting out the O&M part of the business to typically their principal O&M contractor, and then there may be subcontractors that get involved in maintenance activities as well, and sometimes multiple subcontractors for maintenance activities. So the actual accredited entity is quite far removed from where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, in the day-to-day operation. And that's probably an example of the sort of more novel accreditation models that we have in place. And we want to make sure that those parties have the competence and capacity to oversee the rail safety operation, even though they're not managing the day-to-day aspects of it. And they typically do that by using those contractual levers, and by having strong assurance processes in place where they would conduct audits on their contractors. And we want to make sure that we focus on that and hold them to account in those circumstances.
Thanks, Dan. And I think an add-on question would be around the effective management control. And there's always this idea around effective management control on risk being managed by those parties who have their best place to control those risks. And in these kind of contractual arrangement, I think that's a little bit complex, isn't it? And how does ONRSR try to manage that from that perspective? Because, as you said, different people could be pulling levers, but the people who have got effective management control may not have the authority to make some of those changes. And so how do you guys kind of navigate that issue openly?
It can be challenging. So as I mentioned, those parties that are not traditional operators but do have are the accredited entity, they do use those contractual levers, and they use those internal assurance activities to be able to exercise the effective control and management. So when we interact with those accredited entities through our audits and inspections, it's often we focus a lot on how that operator is assuring itself that its contractors are managing the safety of the operation safely so far as is reasonably practicable. And typically that does involve delving into those operators' internal audit programs and making sure they're being delivered effectively. Often we will engage directly as well with the contracted entity. So not necessarily the accredited party, but the contractor that is managing the day-to-day operation. Obviously, always with the accredited party in the room as well. But that way, in many ways, we sort of cut out the middleman and get straight to the people that are managing the day-to-day operation. But remembering that it is the accredited entity that has the effective control and management ultimately. So we will always bring it back to what they're doing to assure themselves that their contractors are managing the safety of the network.
Obviously, there's an accountability to manage the risks, and the parties need to manage the risks, and everyone has safety duties in this area here. So it's those safety duties that, whether you're accredited or not, that still do befall on people and individuals and companies. So I think that's how the short answer is that everyone's got the accountability to manage the risks, and it's not safe to operate the railway. You don't operate the railway. So as an extreme example.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. There are a couple of more questions that are coming through. One of the questions around driver-only operation, is this kind of something that's actually a key risk that you're looking at this particular point in time? I know it's not called out in the safety team per se, but is it still something that there's a focus on from ONSR's perspective?
I guess from a driver-only perspective, it's about managing the risks as far as driver-only goes. And whilst ONSR doesn't have a position on whether it should be driver-only or not driver-only, it's about effectively managing the risks. And that'll be a common answer that we'll say all the time. It's about how you manage the risks, and your associated safety management system accommodates that. What sort of rolling stock's being used, how long are the journeys, how fatigue's being managed, route knowledge from that perspective. But from a driver-only perspective, it's how the organisation can manage the risks to do that operation there.
What I'd probably add to that as well, Sudha, is we have at times had applications to vary accreditation to move to a driver-only operation, and when the safety arguments come through for those applications, it is that kind of our expectation that in most cases at least that there would be the introduction of engineering controls to support that driver-only operation, such as train protection systems.
Thank you. That makes sense. A slightly different question here about the use of AI. Does ONSR use generative AI for audits and inspections and data insights? Is there potential for ONSR to develop its own LLM? So look, I'm not sure who's asking the question, but yeah, look, it's something interesting to ask the question. Where does that sit? You may be able to answer, you may not be able to answer, but I'll put it out to you anyway.
Yeah, it is. It is fascinating, and I'm sure everyone's used ChatGPT and the other large language models that are out there, and it is incredible what these things can do. So yeah, is there a role for that at ONSR? I think probably. It's probably Ewald and I probably aren't the right people to get into that, because we do have our safety strategy, intelligence and insights area that really focus on this stuff, and I'm aware that a number of our analysts are looking at AI applications, mainly around to help with the analysis of all of the different data sources that we can tap into. So you'll be aware we get maybe 12,000 notifiable occurrences each year. We've got findings from audits, inspections, and so on. We get complaints. We've got access to investigation reports that either third-party operator investigations or ONSR investigations. So there is a huge amount of regulatory intelligence that's out there, and it is difficult to bring all that together and analyze it manually. And I think there is a role for AI to help in that. But yeah, we'd have to get our safety strategy team maybe at a future webinar to dive into that.
Look, that'll be a good one for us to think about and consider in the coming months. Thanks, Dane, for answering the question. Here's another question around safety teams that you're looking at, and from operator and procedural aspects of it. The question is around engineering perspective too, from a system safety point of view. Do you also dive into that aspects of it? I kind of partly know that question, but I'll put it to either one of you, Dane or Ewald, to answer that.
Sorry, Sudha. Yeah,
Yeah.
what was the question there?
Is ONSA more focused on the safety themes for the operator and procedure from the operator and procedure point of view, or does it look at engineering perspective to like development of new rail projects, including the products involved, like the standards and safety system safety, EN 50126, the standards and the system safety aspect of it? Are you guys doing procedural as well as system safety?
Understood. Sorry. Yeah. So in short, we look at both. When it comes to the system safety part, that typically we look at during safety change management. So it could be a notification of change that an operator has submitted because they're looking to introduce some new technology or adopt a new standard or make changes to their TMPs, and we would look that they've applied their safety change management system in accordance with their safety management system. Often, if that change is an engineering change, then it would tap into that EN 5012 series of system safety standards, and we'd expect those standards to be applied. It really sort of the focus from ONSA on the system safety aspects tends to be in the major project space. That's where we get deeper into the safety case development and all the system safety assurance arguments that support that.
Thanks, Dan. Look, a couple of other questions coming out around international standards or regional standards versus Australian standards being used for developing or RISSB standard organizational adoption of in Australian standards versus international standards. Does ONSA make any differentiation between which standards operator uses? How does the regulatory activity consider those things?
So I mean, we don't necessarily decide what standards should be used. We expect the operators to determine the most appropriate standards and apply those, and we will hold the operators to account for compliance with their safety management system, which will refer to those standards that they choose to adopt. That being said, there's a huge amount of work following the recent RSNL review around development of mandatory standards and codes of practice and so on. So there'll be lots more to come from ONSA in that space, I'm sure.
Thank you. As we continue to go in this conversation, I want to quickly intercept, and I think there are a few more questions to go through. I want to share a quick slide. Thank you, Dane, for sharing those safety themes. And we recognize while we were developing our work program as well, RISSB work program, our own internal insights have identified similar projects to take on board. And it seems that some of the stuff that we have done is very much aligned to the safety themes that you guys have picked up as well. So I only found the safety themes last week, but I realized the projects are very much aligned. So let me quickly share that for a minute or so. And then we can continue with the discussion questions that are available. So look, I'll leave that at the background as we continue this conversation. As you can see, all of those themes we've either recently, and anything that's published has been recently published in the last 12 months, that's available for discussion. But anything that's not has published, you will realize that those projects are actually in the pipeline for us to have a look at. So we'll be keen to hear the work that's happening in ONSA, but also for those of us who are part of the webinar, look out for those changes. Or if you want to jump in and participate in a development group, there'll be an opportunity for you to participate and also contribute in these discussion. So you can see we did develop a passenger fire on trains. There are a couple of projects that are going on, including fire safety on passenger trains. Contractual stuff, obviously we have done something on light rail, but really also forming some light rail standing committee for us to continue to look at that. Freight runaways, we're doing a whole heap of reviews on the braking standards, so it'll be an interesting question to have a look at. Yard and sidings, recently published a code of practice on shunting on operations and terminals, yards, and private sidings, on sidings and maintenance facilities, and you can have a look at that. And we have done recently hydrology and hydraulics, which were published maybe a few months ago. That looks at network resilience, and it'll be an interesting one. And then we have also picked up the boiler risk through the code of practice review of the code of practice of rail locomotive boilers. And then obviously a couple of products on RRVs also being reviewed from RRV operational point of view and design point of view. The only part I want to quickly highlight for those of us who are in that, there is a document that has been recently released called Management System Framework Reference Guide. It's available for anyone to access on the RISSB website. It maps out all the RISSB documents that are available against the 29 elements of the Rail Safety National Law that can be of usage. So feel free to download a copy, and in your development or in your review of your safety management system where relevant, you are more than welcome to use that. And I'll leave that up on the board as we continue to continue the questions. Here's another question. This is about the different opinions of whether a risk is being managed to SURFAR. This, how does ONRSR manage that? Different people have got different opinions of what SURFAR is and whether a risk is being managed to SURFAR. What happens in your day-to-day interaction, and how do you manage the different opinions, and how do you bring alignment where necessary?
Yeah, thanks, Fuda. I mean, ultimately, the determination of whether a risk has been managed to SURFAR typically only happens after the event, if there's an inquiry and it's a decision for a judge often. In terms of when ONRSR is reviewing risks and sort of, if you like, determining or judging whether a risk has been reduced to SURFAR, we typically look across a number of areas. We'd like to see operators have considered what good practices or best practices across industry. So if there are other operators nationally or even internationally that are managing the same risks, how are those risks? What controls do they have in place? And we'd like to see operators having considered that. We obviously we look at the application of contemporary standards. So if an operator has applied contemporary standards in managing a risk, that will help support their SURFAR argument. Compliance with standards doesn't mean SURFAR though, but it definitely helps the SURFAR argument. And we also want to see that they've consulted both subject matter experts on the risk, workers that are exposed to the risk and that have the day-to-day appreciation and understanding of how it's controlled, and obviously the unions that represent those workers, and then probably last but not least, if having done all of that, the operator is still not quite certain whether the risk is SURFAR or not, then there's always cost-benefit analysis as well, and that quantitative risk assessment. So they're probably the things that we look for when we are making that determination.
Thanks, James. Very comprehensive. Appreciate that. Again, similar. I think you've answered the other one of the other questions in the way this is operated. Let me just jump a couple more in there. Oh, that's right. You talked about education as well as and obviously regulatory activities that you take through audits and inspection. Is there going to be any additional guidance provided on the safety teams and what you will look for when you audit, or is it something that you will provide when those activities takes place, what you're looking for, so that operators can start to plan for it or start to look at their own systems and see where they need to improve in the process in itself?
It's a great question, actually. So the scopes that we're creating for the activities for the audits and the inspections are sort of holistic scopes, and it'll be up to the general manager, the local general manager for which the operators are being, to determine whether that full scope is being used for the activity or just partially, depending on their knowledge of the operator or what previously has been done. From the education perspective on that is those scopes will go out well in advance of if we're undertaking those orders, so people can prepare for them from that perspective. And it's about checking what's in play now, and then there'll be opportunities. If everything's not in play, well, then that'll be an opportunity for the operators to introduce a corrective action plan to rectify those shortfalls if they're found. And so I think from that perspective, I don't think we'll be publishing those scopes on the website moving forward in the short term, but as they're currently still being developed. But from the education perspective, if we do find a consistent theme across operators, probably introduce an education program across that sector.
Yeah, I'll just add to that as well, Sudha. I think to add to what Ewald said there, there's the operator-centric education, but then there's also the wider role we play in sort of information sharing. And you know, if in rolling out our program of work for these sector safety themes, we do start to see consistent themes across industry, or areas for improvement, or great lessons from one operator that can be shared with others, then we'll look to do that through our various engagement channels.
Thanks. Look, I think that's one of the questions that you've already answered, Dane, around how the learnings can be shared as you progress through working in the industry itself. So that's another question that has been already answered. So look, I think we are running out of time. Look, thank you so much for being part of the discussion on a Rail Safety Week. Thank you, Dane, and thank you, Ewald, for taking the time, and for ONRSR for taking the time to participate in this discussion. I think it's a valuable discussion. I think most people who are in this discussion have really highlighted the fact that it's been evaluating. So thanks again for being here. Before we close, I'll quickly highlight the fact tomorrow at the same time, we'll have the learnings in the assessment environment, insights from the Werris Creek investigation. Please tune in for the findings of OTC and what they have to share for tomorrow. So thanks again for everyone for participating in the webinar. Have an enjoyable afternoon. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.